What is good, all you cool cats and kittens? This is your Commissioner Tim back on your screen for the Week 5 Power Rankings post Week 4. What a week of fantasy scoring we just had. Much more action than Week 3, which is what we love to see. But interesting week because there's only 2 players in the top 25 ADP in regular redraft formats scoring inside the top 10. And how about them Lions? So many potential upsets heading into Sunday's late afternoon games with Bills Mafia and 4-putt being projected to potentially pull off the upsets. That said, both of those attempts sort of came up short. And after the 4 weeks now, the current standings, I think, reflect what I believe will become the playoff team. So Montemerecats continues his quest for the perfect season at 4-0. Brady Stir Dynasty and Trust the Process sitting at 3-1. Cup to Canada now improving to a 500 record at 2-2, tied with Full Jerry and Mr. Ambassador slipping with losses in the past week. Bills Mafia and 4-putt, though, showed that they can pull off some upsets in Week 4. Unfortunately, still sit winless at 0-4. So I don't think I can start the power rankings for Week 5 without mentioning the horrible series of injuries that we all witnessed in Week 4. So some of the notable ones, right? Javonte Williams out with the season with the knee, ACL, PCL. Tua, hopefully, it's going to be multiple weeks just to get right for his own health after having back-to-back weeks of concussion. Dawson looked like he pulled a hammy, no surgery required, likely going to be out 1-2 weeks, probably limited for a couple weeks after that too, as we see with injuries of that type. Cordero Patterson officially put on the IR, but all reports say that he should be a full 4 weeks, so he should be back right after the IR time sort of goes up. Jonathan Taylor was tough seeing his ankle injury too, but reports are saying there's a day-to-day with a chance to play on Thursday. I'm not expecting him to play on Thursday, especially after an ankle injury. He's probably going to be limited for a couple of weeks at least. And Treylon Burks, will, with the turf toe not requiring surgery, thankfully, will at least miss probably 3 to 4 weeks, as we see with injuries of that type that doesn't require surgery. And that's not even talking about some of the less relevant, I guess, fantasy players who also had injuries. Isaiah McKenzie, concussion. Daniel Jones had that ankle injury. Justice Hill out with a hammy. Quintus Cephas, which I think is on waivers, but Kenny Golladay out with a knee injury as well. So certainly a tough week of injuries. And interestingly, as you see here, right, these injuries happen to really just all but 3 of our unlucky managers, or just the 3 unlucky managers that we have. Build Mafia with Tua and John Dawson, Full Jerry with Cordero Patterson, who he just traded for. And really, I think I took the biggest hit certainly on the rest of the season outlook, with Javonte being out for the entire season now. And I think JT will probably miss at least 2 weeks, or at least be limited for 2 weeks. Treylon Burks shouldn't impact my rest of the season strength given he's been on the bench, but it's always tough to see a player I'm personally high up on who's starting to see more snaps each week, and now looking like he's figuring out the NFL game, but now he's probably going to be missing at least 3 more weeks. So that said, on a positive route and sticking with rookies, talking about Treylon Burks, I also wanted to highlight some of how our crop of rookies this season are producing this year, and there are some certainly highlights. So let's go over to Rookie Watch. We got 2 running backs in the top 24, with Dameon Pierce leading the way at RB14 and Breece Hall at 19. I think both should be trending upward on top of this, so there's a chance we might have 2 rookie running backs, finishing within the top 12, as they both have established RB1s on their respective teams now. We also have 4 wide receivers in the top 24, which I love to see, especially with how we predict the strength of the rookies this year in the receiver position. So Chris Olave leads the way at 16, Garrett Wilson at 19, Jahan Dotson at 22, and Drake London at 23. One name I want to sort of highlight here is I think Chris Olave has really seemed like he's truly carved out a wide receiver 1 target share there. And, it was sort of crowded with Jarvis Landry and Michael Thomas all coming back. But, he's performing, whether it's Andy Dalton throwing to him or Jameis Winston throwing to him. And through 4 weeks so far, Chris Olave leads the Saints in snaps, target share, and route tran. So that's really, really promising to see. I think it's a safe lock to put Chris Olave, that's going to be finishing at least as a wide receiver 2 tier for this season, which is great for a rookie receiver. Garrett Wilson hasn't necessarily produced with the positive returns on a week-to-week basis as the 19th rank would indicate here, but it's just because it's largely due to week 2 26-point performance. So on top of that, on a positive note, he has been increasing target share each and every week. So numbers-wise, he was at 49% target snap share in week 1, up to 61, then 63, and then in week 4, finishing at 77. So while Zach Wilson coming back and being a quarterback for the Jets is a concern for Garrett Wilson, the Jets offense is obviously looking to highlight Garrett Wilson into prime positions now. So really just sort of summarizing, at least the wide receivers, especially the ones that are taking the first round, I don't think there's any real first rounders that you've been disappointed in, with the exception of Sky Moore, who really just has not gotten any burn on that team right now. And, he's had some issues with fumbles on the kick returns and stuff like that as well. So we'll see how that works out. But really, I want to sort of talk about some other names too. We got Romeo Doubs, who's taking at 307, Isaiah Pacheco at 505. There are also 2 rookies I'm noticing who are primed to probably continue their upward trajectory for the rest of the season. Tyler Algier taking at 301. Should be able to showcase much more for the next few weeks, with Cordero Patterson being on IR. And he actually looked good with the limited touches. He had 10 carries for 84 yards. And while on the Falcons offense, he hasn't gotten involved in the passing offense out of the backfield. Algier also had an 11% target share in his senior year for BYU Cougars, so he should be able to get him going there too. Lastly, I do want to mention it's Kenny Pickett's season now. Mike Tomlin, said that they needed a spark when they got one, and they got one when they stuck in Kenny Pickett in the third quarter and pulled out Mitch Trubisky, thankfully. It looks like reports are saying that Steelers will be rolling with the rookie quarterback, Kenny Pickett, going forward now. And the highlight I want to put up, all of his 13 throws that he threw when he got put in were caught. 10 of them were by the Steelers, and 3 of them for the Jets with 3 interceptions. But I actually don't fault any of those 3 interceptions over to Kenny Pickett, because 2 of them were just off the hands of the receivers, and then the last one was just a Hail Mary towards the end zone at the end of the game, which resulted in the other team getting it. And this should boost George Pickens, because George Pickens had his breakout game of the season, going over 100 yards, and that was good to see. So I think that's the rookie highlights that I sort of want to share here. I'm excited with the progression of the rookies in our league for the rest of the season. Okay, so with that said, let's kick off the power rankings for week 5 by looking at the stats and injuries. Stats and graphs. So points for, there's a potential tiers forming at the top 2 and the top 4 and the rest. And the max points for top 3 have their own sort of tier, I think, and with me in the 4th, the second sort of tier by itself, and with the rest of the team, not really much to see there. And I'm going to go over to the graphs and flash through it. After 3 weeks, we sort of saw sort of a league-wide parity, but I think, after 4 weeks, what we're seeing now is that there's a parity at the top 4 and the parity at the bottom 4, meaning they're all very, very close to each other. So what that means, especially at the parity that we see in the bottom 4, it looks like we're going to be able to see a lot more victories for Bills Mafia and 4-Putt, especially when they're going up against Mr. Ambassador and Full Jerry. So last week when I was talking about, Bills Mafia and 4-Putt being able to pull off maybe around 5 wins between the 2 of them for the season, I actually felt like that was a little bit generous, but after seeing sort of, week 4 performance, I actually feel much more comfortable with that figure now. I'm not predicting Bills Mafia getting his top 3 players like he did in week 4 over 85 points any weeks going forward, which really boosted his scoring output for the week, but we did see some ceilings of his players. And they're much higher than, I imagined coming into the seasons. And so I'll talk more about Bills Mafia and 4-Putt a bit more in the respective dedicated sections in the power rankings. And this is the max points for. Really not much really changes here. And I'll dive into each and every one of these teams individually in their own sections and the rankings themselves. All right, so I mentioned this last week. where we had a target for 8 wins. I still think that is the target. And now that we're 4 weeks in, I feel like I can reveal another factor I put into the power rankings once we get into the midseason like this. So if you sort of look at this graph, you've got the teams on the left, the total wins to date, and then how many wins they need for the rest of the season to hit that 8 target. And then what that would imply, what that would mean from the rest of the season record as we have 10 games remaining. And then what that winning percentage implied over the next 10 games would imply for a full season record, so you can sort of see how significant some of these things are and how significant some of the early starts and how significant some of these slow starts really represent in the playoff race. So I'm just taking from the rankings of the max points for in the previous slide that you saw. But teams that are starting 3-1, the record needed to hit 8 is going to be a 500 record at 5-5, which would obviously mean a 7-7. But if you look at Montemerecats, who's starting at a perfect 4-0, all they would need is a 4-6, which would represent like a 5-9. Obviously these are rounded, but would represent a 5-9 full season record, which we know that even with injuries and things like that, even horrible ones, I think 5-9 for Montemerecats' strength of roster is certainly doable, and that's why I call them a playoff lock. Cup to Canada with other teams at 2-1, 2-2 would represent, they would need 6-4 for the rest of the season. Starts to imply a little bit more of a challenging uphill. It's 9-5 implied full season record. So you start to sort of see how this sort of changes for the teams as we go into mid-season, and certainly we got some big matchups coming up next week. So we'll see how all of this sort of gets changed over. So, all right. So a decent amount of injuries and just output last week. So I think you're going to see a lot of movement in the power rankings this week, and actually you will see a lot of power movements in the power rankings this week. That said, I do believe that the playoff picture is starting to get a bit tighter. The injuries affected the power rankings this week, as it will for the rest of the season. And I feel like at full health, I feel comfortable calling 2 playoff teams playoff locks at this point. But as we saw in week 4, injuries are part of football, and season outlook can change overnight drastically. So that said, I feel comfortable calling playoff lock on one team, even potential with on a plausible worst case scenario range, and that's Kyle. So I think starting off at 4-0, as you saw in the previous slide, makes a huge difference in terms of what you need to do for the rest of the season to make playoffs. All right, so that said, let's start. And now that we're talking about playoffs and sort of mid-season, I started to put these teams into tiers as I see it. This tier starts off with no playoff chance, but potential for upset parties, and it's the 2 teams that we saw that potentially was able to pull off upsets last week. I'm going to start with Bills Mafia, who slips himself down a spot. And I'll talk about it. I think obviously him and 4-Putt are similar tiers, but I'll talk about the tiebreaker for why I have 4-Putt sort of sitting at 7 right now. Couple comments. What a ceiling resetting week of expectations for Rashad Penny and TJ Hawkinson's. I know Bills Mafia has been a little bit worried about TJ Hawkinson. I believe he had TJ on the trading block at one point, but I mean, why trade him away? I think you're not going to really get much better tight end prospects than TJ, especially in the dynasty format. He's still young. And as we saw when Amon-Ra St. Brown is hurt and other receiver options are hurt, TJ is able to produce. And sort of like what we saw with Amon-Ra last year when TJ himself was hurt and DeAndre Swift was hurt, Amon-Ra was able to become the alpha dog for that, the Detroit Lions offense. And then that's what really kickstarted, I think, his production, Amon-Ra, that we saw in season 2. Dan Campbell finally saw what an angry TJ Hawkinson is able to actually produce. So I think this is only going to be helping for the rest of the season rankings for TJ Hawkinson here. That's it. Some injuries, Dawson injury and Zach Wilson being back at quarterback will hurt Garrett Wilson's production. So both of those things, I think, certainly impacts negatively to, what both of those players that he plugs into his starting positions will impact for his production for the weeks ahead. Brandon could have pulled off an upset. He could have been, the 7th here at minimum, maybe, even higher. But I think he could have won if he wasn't traveling. But I appreciate you, Brandon, for traveling and for getting to plug in your right starters. That said, just for the note of the league, One of the things that I thought about, like even with my case, but earlier on in the off season, just to make sure there weren't inherent sort of tanking things that were happening, as we wanted to prevent that, is to make sure that managers are able to start all their players. One of the challenges that comes with it, especially with the case that we saw last week, is we can't unfortunately stick in what a best ball option would be for that. Because then you can start to game things, or you just start players that are injured on purpose to sort of get the best ball scores on the rest of your roster. So it's a little bit of a tricky situation, but I don't think any one of us are concerned about Bills Mafia intentionally not starting players. And I don't think that's going to be an issue for any of our managers. So I think the fact that we have integrity in the league, is going to be enough for us to sort of have mutual trust with each other that this is going to be taken advantage of. But unfortunately, from a commissioner standpoint, either there isn't really a quite clean-cut option for us to stick in the best ball option because of what it may incentivize for sort of exploitation for even teams that do want to get victory. So hopefully, I did want to sort of mention that. Ultimately, I really wanted the score difference between me and Bills Mafia to be enough of a difference so that the best ball wouldn't matter, but just wanted to sort of mention that here, and hopefully you guys are cool with that. All right, moving on to number 7, we got 4-putt moving up, and he beat the league median score. It was actually a really good week. Now that said, Miles Sanders probably scored his season high for the entire season, but the rest of the team, if you look at their outputs, it wasn't anything crazy. So on top of that, he put up 130. On top of that now, we got Tyler Algier that's probably going to be in a much better, bigger role, and he's probably going to be starting for 4-putt going forward, especially how Algier was able to sort of perform with 10 touches, in week 4. The tiebreaker between 4-putt and Brandon for me is that I think, like I said, for the rest of the season production, their ability to potentially get into 120 plus seems more reliable than what Bills Mafia had to do to get over 120, which was to depend on top 3 of his players scoring 85 points, which is going to be really, really tough, I think, with both their rosters. But that said, we got 4-putt. Chris Olavi's playing well. A lot of these players, Tyler Agil's going to be doing well. A lot of these players are able to produce 10 plus points, and we saw with Jerry Jeudy as well. So a lot of these things makes me feel like 4-putt has a better probability to score 120 over, which then would potentially give you into these like win and upset win territory than Brandon's Bills Mafia would. Now that said, Bills Mafia has got a bunch of rookies that they should theoretically be playing stronger as the season progresses. So we'll see how it goes. But for now, this is how I have the rankings. All right. Next tier of teams is right now I'm saying outside looking in with a chance. I'm not counting any of these teams out for playoffs, but they're certainly not a favorite to make the playoffs right now. I do think there's a meaningful amount of chance for them to be able to get into that playoffs, depending on how other things sort of break down. So this tier starts off with Full Jerry dropping down the spot. If he scored a league low at 80, and it's probably going to be a season low to be fair. It's going to be hard for me to sort of keep you up at the position that he was at. The current roster right now is also very injury-ridden, and the rest of the production that we saw as like in week 4, it's just unreliable. Najee Harris isn't able to get going. He's had another injury to Cordero Patterson on top of the existing injuries that he already had to Amon-Ra St. Brown and other sort of high performers. Trevor Lawrence, he looked really good in the first 3 weeks and then sort of has this weird performance in week 4. That said, if you look at the next 3 weeks, what I'm worried for Full Jerry is he really could be in for a free fall. Full Jerry and 4-putt, don't count 4-putt out, especially with Tyler Algier being able to sort of play next week. So he's going to be facing 4-putt and then a gauntlet of Cup to Canada and Trust the Process in the next 3 weeks. I mean, John could go 2-5 by the time that week 8 sort of rolls around. Or he could be 3-4. I think to keep Full Jerry's chances at a realistic sort of probability to make playoffs or a potential chance, he would have to figure out a way to win 2 of the next 3. If he goes even 1 win and 3 losses or 2 losses, I think that starts to put him in a really, really, really tough territory. That said, if the 1 victory he takes out of the 3 is from Trust the Process in the 3rd week, that's going to have the highest impact to his probability to probably potentially be able to sneak in for a 4th position. But actually, the odds would be that he's helping Mr. Ambassador more than he is himself with that. So next 3 weeks are going to be really, really interesting for Full Jerry. And that brings me over to number 5. Sergey going up to number 5. Sergey has a very, very consistent team. But as always, that consistency isn't coming with enough firepower. He scored I believe his season low last week, but it was still only maybe, I want to say 3 points lower than range. So he's scoring 112 on average. So that said, there's a lot of room to become competitive with Mr. Ambassador's roster. He's got a healthy J.K. Dobbins. He looked good in last week. And I think he would have been able to potentially put up a closer battle against Ryan had J.K. Dobbins started. I don't know if he was going to be pull off a win necessarily, but J.K. Dobbins should be a factor in getting Mr. Ambassador much more competitive, potentially as high as 5, 6, 7 points than his league average right now, especially if J.K. Dobbins does stay healthy and he's getting plugged in. In my opinion, right now, I think Mr. Ambassador is really the only other team in contention for playoffs for the teams that are not already sitting with winning records and sitting for or in the top 4 power rankings. That said, same as John, the next 3 weeks are going to be huge season-setting weeks for him as well. Going up against Trust the Process this week, then Montemerecats, and then 4-putt. So this is just as tough as John, but Mr. Ambassador, if he can pull off some upsets, that's going to get him into the winning column while knocking down some of the teams that are above him. But no matter what happens, I think he needs to pull off a split between Trust the Process and Montemerecats, and then certainly take the 4-putt victory home and finish no worse than a 2-1 for him to stay in playoff contention for the rest of the season. All right, this tier is a playoff likely, not contender, and there's really only one team here, and I have sort of 2 other tiers after this, and this is me. So I think I am right now the 4th likeliest to make the playoffs, especially with the top end firepower gone, with Javonte now out for the season. I'm now getting super thin at running back. JT's injury, he's probably going to be limited, like I said, for at least 2 weeks. On top of DeAndre Swift being out, and maybe DeAndre Swift doesn't come back until their bye week, so maybe week 7, week 8. Really, until Jonathan Taylor and at least 2 other players at the flex position become reliable and at their expected sort of outputs, so meaning JT needs to be a top 3, top 2 running back on a week-to-week basis. My team will stay just as a playoff likely, but not a contender. That said, there's enough things that can move here in order for me to sort of move up, but we'll see, because without Jonathan Taylor coming back, none of this will matter. So it's going to be him plus, I think, 2 other sort of flex players, whether that be Breece Hall, or whether that be Travis Etienne, whether that be, even Pat Freiermuth or a Drake London. And they start to really, really perform, I'm not going to be able to sort of contend with the top 2 teams of the league. All right, moving over to number 3. Playoff favorite, I don't want to say it's a pretender like my team. Certainly able to contend, as we saw, but just a tier below right now, the top 2 teams. And that's going to be Ryan, moving up a spot. So the only thing that's really a negative about Brazier Dynasty is this team's just a roller coaster. Top 3 finish in alternating weeks. So week 1, week 2, and then week 4, and then week 1 and week 3 were just bottom sort of 4 type of finishes. And I think that sort of corresponds to the strategies that he's taking with having both Tyreek and Waddle with Jamar and T paired up together. All those players seem to have sort of alternating performances from one another. T had a big week this week, Jamar had it last week, Waddle had it last week, Tyreek had it this week, just back and forth. This team is super, super deep, but it's just inconsistent. So like I said on last week's analysis, I think it's just this team is the team with the highest theoretical ceiling at the max points for, I think. But it's just really, really hard to predict which players are going to be there because it's just not a clear-cut starter in a bench. Okay, moving over to the 2 and the 1 in the power rankings for this week. This is the true contenders, in my opinion. So number 2, I got Cup to Canada. By the way, I think both of them are just as strong as each other. It just the records are what's causing the 1 and 2 splits right now. So Cup to Canada, 2 weeks with 200 points, max points for. So that's 50% of the time. Points for each week is now second highest on average. So meaning he finishes, usually at the second highest on average of our league week to week. And then on an average points for basis every week he's the top team right now. And throughout these 4 weeks, he has finished no less than third highest in the league through these 4 weeks. And on top of that, rates get richer with Dameon Pierce, Melvin Gordon, Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara, who haven't really produced for him in the first 4 weeks, whether through roles like Dameon Pierce and Melvin Gordon or injuries like Alvin Kamara and Michael Thomas. But these 4 players should be likely making their way into a starter position in the rest of the season somewhere. And it's only going to help Cup to Canada become stronger in terms of his sort of week to week production. All right, that brings us to Montemerecats, who I believe this is his 3rd straight week. So it's set a Cool Cats and Kittens league record for Dynasty, power ranking sitting at number 1, consecutive weeks sitting at number 1. So Montemerecats, he actually has the highest average points for standing each week, finishing 3rd, 1st, and then this week finishing 2nd highest. So that's a 1.75 place finish. That said, if I was to nitpick anything, I think QB2 position, lack of production there or lack of consistent production there will likely haunt him sometime in the future, especially as Lamar showed that he is in fact human. And on a positive note, it's really, really great to see Eckler bounce back in the running game. And actually, I believe he got utilized in the red zone as well, which was theoretically apparently not a role that he was going to be taking this year based on his sort of podcast that he has on Eckler's Edge. All right, so that wraps it up for our power rankings heading into week 5. Here's the overall sort of power rankings and points for. As you can see, lots of movements except for the top 2. I'm looking forward to chatting with you all on Thursday, Sunday, and Monday. Good luck, boys.